Now, at least 550 people have been arrested countrywide during those protests yesterday, with the National Joint Operational and Intelligence Structure saying they were arrested for public violence, intimidation, damage to critical infrastructure, theft and attempted looting. Now, of course, NetJoin's further saying it's satisfied with the way that law enforcement deployments had ensured law and order. But it also says businesses and services managed to operate with minimum disruptions. Well, the EFF has called the day a success, while the ANC said it was a complete failure. But to get some analysis with political analyst joining us, Prof. Sandile Swana, this morning. And thank you so much, Prof, for your time. Happy Human Rights Day as well to you. I see you dressed to the nines, so I know you definitely have plans to commemorate today. So thank you for joining us, Prof.
Thank you to me and to your viewers. Good morning.
Good morning. I'm not sure if you participated in the shutdown yesterday because, I mean, yes, it's the EFF who organized it, but they called it a national shutdown available to all South Africans. Whether you did or not, what's your post-mortem of the day? Do you agree with the EFF that it was a success, or do you agree with the ANC's Fikile Mbalula saying it was a complete flop?
Yes, I think that the issue of whether it was a success or not needs to be, you need a certain type of tools to look at it. It's just like, for instance, when people ask you whether the armed struggle was success or failure, and we should accept that it was a success because the ANC took power in South Africa. Although the South African Defence Force will say they were never defeated in the battlefield. So there are targets. One of the targets was to highlight the necessity for President Cyril Ramaphosa to remove himself as state president of South Africa. From that angle, you notice that very early on, the BBC, which is a major international news network, picked that up. And that, in fact, in response to that, the fact that there was a proposed regime change, the South Africa then released 3,400 soldiers. If there was no realistic threat that Cyril Ramaphosa could be removed yesterday, the soldiers would have stayed in the barracks.
We know that under the same breath, Prof, I mean, the EFF calling this a national shutdown, as you mentioned, for the president to resign, but also for rolling blackouts to stop in the country, amongst others, you know, unemployment being some of the critical issues they raised. But do you think there was also, was this a political strategy as well for the EFF ahead of next year's general elections? And do you think that will almost shift, you know, the political landscape in the country moving forward?
The EFF has always profiled from 2013 until now as a revolutionary movement. And in the process of doing that, one of their first tasks was to remove President Zuma, and it was necessary to remove President Zuma. There were many people who agreed. Until today, there are many who agree. Even today, it is necessary to remove President Cyril Ramaphosa from power because it has been discovered that he's honest, he's implicated us in the grey listing in illicit money flows and money laundering, and is being unwisely protected, just like Zuma before him, by the African National Congress. So the EFF is continuing its profile of challenging impunity in South Africa, which started with Jacob Zuma and continued with President Cyril Ramaphosa.
From where South Africa stands, and just in terms of participation of the national shutdown, whether it was in person, on the ground, with the actual marches and the protests, or online with the hashtag national shutdown trending, where do you think South Africans stand with what the EFF is saying and what the EFF is protesting for, and also what they see in terms of the ANC's actions or perhaps reaction to the protest? Where do South Africans stand, in your opinion?
I think if you look, for instance, at Helen Zille, who is one of the major political figures in South Africa, who also leads the DA, she has repeatedly said that it is necessary to remove the ANC completely from power. And Steenhuisen has repeated similar sentiments and expressing worry about the dishonesty of Cyril Ramaphosa stuffing money in furniture, and the Deputy President, Gigi Mabuza, stuffing money in Jojo tanks and so on. Similarly, Herman Mashaba has not hesitated and has emphatically said the ANC must be completely removed from power. So major political parties in South Africa and actors in the political arena do want not only Ramaphosa to be removed, they want the ANC to be removed. However, there were two interests yesterday. One interest was of the ANC and the beneficiaries of the largesse of the African National Congress to protect the status quo. In other words, to remain in power and continue milking the state. That they would protect, and the South African Defence Force was partly deployed to achieve that objective. On the other hand, the CPF, Property Owners Association, were worried that the EFF itself and its members may be undisciplined in conducting the march, but every other march and every large gathering always attracts criminals who may want to rob people, who may want to damage property. So those were the concerns of the private citizens, not that they wanted to protect Ramaphosa to stay in power. They wanted to protect themselves and protect their properties and businesses.
Prof, how do you think Cyril Ramaphosa will respond, if at all he will? I'm sure himself and his media team have been monitoring the entire day, obviously with the police minister early morning alongside Ned Joins, as you've mentioned, being on the ground to monitor that there was no violence on the ground. But from Cyril Ramaphosa's perspective, because the call is for him to resign, what do you think him and his camp will do I suppose, as a form of reaction, if any?
Yes, they will every day. Remember that Cyril Ramaphosa can be removed from power on any day because he is losing legitimacy. I'm sure over the weekend, many people saw the article by one of the most senior journalists in South Africa, Banim Tombot, where he unmasked completely the dishonesty of Cyril Ramaphosa, and that in fact is unsuitable to continue as president of this country. So the facade and the mask that he has been wearing that gave him some little bit of legitimacy to stay in power is being removed on a continuous basis. And to stay in power and to have the population supporting you to stay in power, you need legitimacy. And Cyril Ramaphosa is lacking that legitimacy. We know that he had resigned towards the end of last year, and it was certain interests who are benefiting from the patronage networks of the African National Congress who asked him to stay there because they can benefit better if he is the one who is in power. So every day counts. I think they'll be grateful for every day that he stays in power, but at the same time, every day he can fall.
Before I let you go, Prof, where is the agency of the ordinary South African? I mean, when we covered the national shutdown yesterday, one of our reporters spoke to some of those who were protesting, and they said it's time for South Africans to take matters into their own hands in terms of having their voices heard. They can no longer stand rolling blackouts, the high rates of unemployment, and seeing the economy go down under the leadership of the ANC-led government. So what does that mean for the power with which the majority, which is South Africans, stand at this point? Of course, putting aside political parties and their voices and their influence, just the ordinary South Africans, where does their power and agency lie?
The power and agency lies in them, in their own NGOs, small business associations and so on, churches and other structures of the kind. But remember that even the people who actually carried the banner of the anti-apartheid struggle were actually a small percentage of the population. The bulk of the population are concerned with day-to-day bread and butter issues. And some of the people, by the way, who are supposed to be saying something about this, even the major intellectuals who are supposed to be independent, a lot of them always think about where is the next check going to come from. Even some of the analysts are worried that you must be careful what you say on national television because your checks, wherever you are getting your money, might be closed. So there is a high degree of intimidation in South Africa by the ruling class. And therefore, that reduces the agency of ordinary masses. But indeed, there is a small number of people, but sufficient. It's a small number, but it's sufficient, like it was sufficient during apartheid to actually change the situation.
Could the irony be that today's Human Rights Day and there might be, a violation of one's human rights to freedom of speech, freedom of expression?
Yes, I think you can see some of the interviews that go on, even on national television, where you start to see some of the ministers almost intimidating the interviewer on screen. So the situation is uncomfortable. And what makes it uncomfortable, it's when, unlike Zuma, who believed that the ANC will rule until Jesus comes back, he could giggle and laugh because the ANC had a significant majority. The ANC today, by their own research, their own admissions and public statements, they now see that they are a 40% party. They are losing power. So that element of desperation and Stalinism will manifest itself a little bit more as we go forward to the 2024 elections, and maybe even today.
We'll leave it there, Prof. Thank you so much for joining us. Professor Sandile Swana, political analyst.